Hello, and welcome back to the Nourish with Purpose podcast. I'm so glad you're here for today's episode. It really is going to be such a fun one. But before we get into that, I would just ask, if you haven't yet, that you would leave a rating or review on either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That just helps the podcast get traction and get into the ears of more listeners. Or if you wanted to, you could just send this episode or any episode of mine to a friend. Let them know that you're listening, that you enjoy, or what you enjoy about the podcast. I would just appreciate that so much. I hope you're having a great Wednesday or whenever you're listening. I feel like this last week, honestly, it's felt like forever since I've been recording. I'm recording this on Tuesday, so the day before you'll be listening to it. But we recently had some snow. I really thought we were done with that. I'm so glad I didn't get outside and do any yard work yet, because when it's nicer outside, you really get in the vibe of wanting to do that. And I didn't. I had some self-control, even though we had pretty good weather this last week, and realized obviously that we're not even to April yet. I just need to cool it on that front. But outside of that, honestly, things are going really, really well right now. I feel like I am doing good. I started that group, Inflamed to Inspired, and that has just been so refreshing to have a group of women to communicate with, to share things with, to talk to once a week. That started on Thursday, and I had a few technical issues on the call, but really everything went fairly well. And we meet now every Thursday for the next 6 more weeks, and it's just really, really good. If you are wanting to join the waitlist for that group, you can actually apply through the link in the description of today's episode. I'm not sure when I will be launching that again. There was a lot of interest for the masterclass, and I know not everybody obviously was able to join in real time, but if you want to join that group, we also have a Facebook group, and it's just fun to see what people are making, how they're adopting the action plan for this week. So far, it's just been so good, and I really was craving something like that. I love my one-on-one clients, and I'm actually at capacity now for taking any more clients, at least for the month of March and April, I believe. But that's something where you can always reach out to me and join the list. I have clients that are going through the program, and then they kind of graduate from the program, and then I can fill more spots. So not to say I won't have any spots available in the next month, but pretty limited. And that's just really exciting news for me to share. I think a lot of people still think that this is like a hobby, or maybe I just think that people think this is a hobby. It's just kind of funny because my schedule is so non-traditional. But to be able to be doing what I'm doing and feel so fulfilled and enjoy it so much just is such a blessing. And of course, I have to thank you for that. I know even like with the podcast, if you don't work with me through group or one-on-one coaching, even just through listening to the podcast or being on Balance, our group on Instagram is at like 77 members now. So if you didn't know I have that, I do have a group called Nourish with Purpose. It's a channel on Instagram. If you go to my profile, you can join that. I don't share too much on there. I feel like social media recently has felt very overwhelming, which I definitely go through spurts of feeling so inspired and so, happy and excited to be on it, and then I'm just like so over it, and I feel like I'm in that depth, and I think that's totally fine, and it's totally normal. We're not meant to share every aspect of our lives. That's definitely not normal to always want to share everything, but on there I'm hoping to share some more like behind the scenes things, get more of your opinions on what you want to listen to, what you want to hear on the podcast. Hopefully it can just be a fun space. What I do hate about that is I can't really get feedback from you unless I would like grant you access to send messages, and I can't really do that for every single person. So that's the one downside, but anyway, it's still fun to connect in a different way. And if you haven't, I'll have that linked in the description of the episode as well. But outside of that, this last weekend, it was just pretty relaxing. I've been working at a coffee shop on Fridays and Saturdays, and really it does not feel like a job at all. I really did it because I work so much at home, and I'm like, I need to put myself out there and I need to see people throughout the week. And so the opportunity just came up to do that. And I'm very, very grateful because it's so fun because I get to talk a lot about what I do coaching wise while I'm actually working there. So it's just such a great outlet for me. And it's a great way for people to hear more about what I'm doing with exercise classes that I lead in town. And there's also some changes happening with that this next month. So there's just a lot going on, but in a really good way. It's not in an overwhelming or stressful way, which is something that I really haven't been able to say for a long time. I think obviously from the outside, everything can look so picture perfect or organized and put together. And I know I'm somebody who really struggles not being a perfectionist with everything I do. And I'm learning that I have to let some of that go. And I think God is definitely showing me that too, because even like on Thursday with our coaching call, my computer is pooping out on me and I just know that. But I just couldn't get logged on to Zoom. I couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi that I was on. It was such an issue. So I had to join from my phone and record it through my phone. And it was just super weird how it was recorded. I hated that I had issues. And then I get really self-conscious that people think I'm not professional or, like all of those thoughts start racing. And then you realize like there's just some things that are out of your control. And I'm trying to just understand that. A big thing that I think has shown up for me recently is how disconnected I am from my body right now. And this goes into kind of how I'm nourishing my mind, body, spirit. I'm going to talk about the mind piece a little bit. So how I'm nourishing my mind is I've been adding in some breath work and time in silence, which I've been doing the time in silence for the last 3 weeks. It's one of the action plans for Inflamed to Inspired. So the group of women in that program are actually implementing that this week as part of their action plan. But I have been doing that piece, but I'm adding in some somatic breathing exercises as well as some somatic work. And I really don't know a lot about somatic, what do they call it? Anyway, like the whole idea of it. I don't know a lot. And that's why I am actually now I signed up for like a masterclass with somatic breathing techniques or just somatic techniques. Really what it's meant to do is create self-awareness to feel like you actually understand and listen to your body. And it's a way to help regulate your nervous system. So I know I'm somebody who quite honestly is probably addicted to that fight or flight not environment, but I like to be, I shouldn't say I like to be stressed, but I function at a pretty high level of like, if I can squeeze in 600 things in 5 minutes, I will, even if it means I'll be 1 minute late to something. Like, that's just how I function. Like, I'll try to do a ton of things in a short amount of time. And like, part of me, I think gets a rush from doing that. And so that's where like this week in the coaching group I'm leading, we are focusing on our nervous system and our brain. And that is something I'm always having to focus on and like reconnect to. But anyway, long story long, because I kind of went on a tangent there. But in this class, they have you, in the intro, they were having you just like touch different parts of your body. So like starting at your brain, moving down to your shoulders and your arms and your forearms and your fingers, and then moving to your chest and your abdomen and your pelvis. And while you're doing that, you're supposed to be feeling the connection of your hand to your skin or to that area. So like I noticed that for me, when I go like my hands to my knees, my fingers can feel my knees, but I have a hard time having my knees feel my hands. And it sounds kind of wackadoodle, I know. But really it's just like creating that awareness and like actually being present in your body. And I realized how disconnected that is for me. And so I'm actually working through that class right now. I know that is something I would love to be able to offer, is like the somatic side of things, because I know our nervous system is such a huge part of our overall health. And yes, I can help clients to an extent, but there's a whole another realm. And I love when there's a whole nother realm of things to learn, because it gives me an opportunity to expand what I know. Sometimes I think a lot of what I do, people think like, well, I eat healthy, like what can you do for me? And yes, that's a piece of what I do. Maybe you know everything there is to know about food and eating good food, but there's other plans and and habits that we integrate that has nothing to do with food. Even though a lot of what I do is like nourishment focused. Even through this podcast, we talk about how nourishing your body is your mind, body, and spirit. So nourishing yourself, I guess, not your body, but it includes all three. So if we just think of like, well, yeah, if I'm nourishing my body with food, I'm good to go. Must be, like, I don't know what the reason is that I still don't feel good. I think I have a lot of people that maybe eat right, but they don't feel good. And so there's other things to look into. So anyway, for me, I am diving into somatic breathing exercises, and they're kind of funky, but a lot of it again is just creating that like bodily awareness or awareness of your surroundings. So like rather than looking at your surroundings and thinking, okay, there's a plant, there's a chair, there's a mirror, you're thinking of like, okay, what colors do I see? Well, I see light green, I see a dark green, I see a gold. Okay, what shapes am I seeing? Well, I see an oval, and you just like really create awareness with where your body is, and then you create that awareness with how you're physically feeling in that space. And again, I know it sounds kind of woo to me at first. I'm like, okay, does this really matter? But as I started adding in that breath work, I actually did kind of a series of it on Sunday. And again, I'm very much an amateur. I can't really give advice on what to do to align with that practice. I just know what I've seen and what I've looked into. But I did some of those breathing techniques, and I told my husband, I'm like, for the first time, like I was sitting in silence and my brain was absolutely like a clean slate. That never ever happens for me. Usually if I sit in silence, I'm thinking about the 600 things that I should be doing. Whereas like I sat there doing these breathing techniques, and about, 4 rounds or sequences in, I'm like, I couldn't think of anything if I tried. Like I almost feel like I have no memory because my brain is just completely wiped. And that was just a really good feeling. I feel like it set my day up to feel so much more calm. My nervous system felt much more regulated. I wasn't trying to do too much or stress myself out over things. Like I truly just disconnected from work, which is probably the first time or the first day that I've completely like not worked in the last 2 months. And that's not normal. That's not healthy, right? I know more than I know for myself, like I can't be doing that all the time. I can't always have to be on, right? And I think that's hard because there is no disconnect between people contacting me on my phone and through email and all the things. But just even like taking a day off of social media completely, I've talked about that. How I'm doing that with Instagram is I've took a day, my Sundays, I'm completely off. And I'm doing that through Lent, but I think I'll stick with it just because it's been a really good habit for me to develop. All right, so then moving into how I'm nourishing my body, I've started running again, which if you've been around, I trained for the half marathon. I ran the half marathon in November, the Good Life Halvesy, and then I didn't run again after that because we got into winter, and if it's cold outside, I'm sorry, I'm not running. I'm not that dedicated and I'm not training for anything. And so I took the whole winter off, and I actually went out this weekend and ran 4 miles, which I think that is such a mindset thing of being able to run further distances. My tempo was not fast because it was 20-mile-an-hour winds and I felt like I was getting nowhere when I was running, but I really think me running the 13.1 miles now allows me to go out for a run and not think I'm going to die at 1.5 miles, even if physically my body wants to kind of do that. I know, okay, I really can push through to 4 miles because I've done it before. I just need to slow things down. And so that's something I'm adding back in maybe 2 to 3 days a week. I think summer or spring and summer is just the best time to get into it. And then I'll probably take the winter off again and then start it back up. I also know my body and that I really need to emphasize recovery because I do talk so much about low impact exercise and how important that is, especially for us as women with our hormones and our blood sugar levels and all the things, especially musculoskeletal inflammation. But outside of that, like I know with me having an injury, I need to then run for, like I said, 2 to 3 days a week, take some time off. And on those days when I'm not running, I need to be incorporating strength training, which I've been doing already all this last year. But having those days to be building up the strength, because you feel so much better when you're running and you physically feel strong. And then, like you have the lung capacity to run and feel strong too. So I really have been enjoying that. And then spirit. I think listening to worship music when you're getting ready or when you're in the shower is just very comforting. I notice I do that more so in the evenings, like after supper. Nate's my husband. He's been working later in the evening because it's tax season. He's an accountant. And so I will turn on some music as I'm like getting ready for bed or as I'm showering. And I think it's just a good way for me to calm down and I dim the lights. I shower with just like a lamp on. So it's just like a very cozy environment. All right. Well, let's get into the bulk of today's episode. I didn't mean for that intro to be so long, but that's okay. They usually are. But today we're talking about being crunchy, and my husband absolutely hates that word because to him it sounds like crusty, and being crusty is just not the vibe. But no, being crunchy. So we're talking, am I crunchy? I'm going to be talking about what that even means. If you're like, I've never heard that term before, we're going to dive into that. And I'm going to give you my top 12 crunchy tendencies. So I'm really exposing myself here. I really fear the judgment that could come from this, but at the same time, I think so much of what we do is like, it's our life. If it's not impacting negatively the relationships with people around you, or if it's not pushing people away, I don't see what I personally do to be an issue for like the relationships and the people in my life, which these things definitely don't. If anything, I think they're improving my health. And I've also learned that it's okay if we have different outlooks on things, or if we view certain rules differently, or even like Western medicine versus Ayurvedic medicine or more Eastern medicine. Like, I think it's totally cool. You have to do what you need to do. I, really don't judge if you are very big into Western medicine and all those things. I think that there is definitely a space for both. And I never want people to get offended or think that I think that Western medicine is shouldn't be respected or that it's not useful, because it absolutely is. I just like to give that little kind of warning, just knowing that I'm not judging you if you're big into Western medicine, nurses, doctors, all the things, because we need you. I'm just going to share from my perspective how I choose to handle things. Not saying I would never go towards Western medicine practices, and I got this idea from a client who she was talking about Emily Morrow. She has an Instagram page called That's So Crunchy, and then she just recently wrote a book, and she was telling me about how she was reading this book and started freaking out like, oh my gosh, the water, the tablets, I have to get rid of all of it, and how it can go from 0 to 100 really, really quick. Everything that I do with clients is very, very gradual. And that's really how I have viewed my own journey, is it's been gradual. So as I'm talking, if you're like, oh my gosh, like what is she even talking about? I've never heard about my water being an issue or whatever it is, like this isn't intended for you to panic. And of course, the more gradually you can adopt some of these things, the more they're going to stick if you want them to. And that's something that for me, these are not things that overnight I just decided I'm making all these changes. Again, just like my own health journey that I share about pretty often, it's been like a 5+ year journey. And I didn't really get into this until I met my friend Emily, and we worked together, and we just aligned with so many of our views. And I feel like that was just when I really realized that I don't have to keep doing things that maybe I don't align with just because I fear what other people will think. It just gave me somebody else to talk to about these things, and that aligned with how I also approach them. And for me, that was just very refreshing and comforting to know. And it's also kind of funny too, because my parents are actually kind of into the things that I talk about. Like my mom messaged me yesterday and she's like, okay, my feet are swollen and puffy. Like, what do I do? I'm like, put your feet up on the wall for 10 minutes and then do sweeping motions from your ankles up to help with that lymphatic drainage and to get that blood flow back to your heart and things like that. She's like, well, what about the salt? I know you do something with salt. I'm like, yes, you can add a pinch of Himalayan or sea salt to your water. Again, that's a great way to be hydrated. And salt doesn't really make you that puffy. I think we usually think it does. But I add salt to my water and I don't notice any puffiness. And obviously that's going to be different person to person. If you have health concerns and you have to reduce salt, that's something I can't speak on because I don't know you personally. But I feel like my last resort is usually like taking a medication or even taking a supplement, honestly. And so it's just fun to know some of these habits or techniques you can add in without having to do something too extreme, right? I think it can be very simple. So all that to say, we're going to get into it. You can kind of gauge how crunchy you are based off of how I kind of describe what this is. But really, let's just keep things light, keep things fun. But according to Cambridge Dictionary, which take this with a grain of salt, but it says living in a way that shows you care about the environment, accepting and encouraging social change, which I think society always kind of needs to change, right? There's some things that have been working that we should stick with, but I also think there is room for growth in how we approach things this day and age. Or being crunchy means that you usually don't go along with mainstream ideas, which that is the piece that I would say I would agree with, is I don't typically go along with mainstream ideas in the sense of like a traditional standard American diet and lifestyle. I do things a lot differently than what I would say that would be. But then based off of the Nourished Life, which these are all just like websites, there's not a lot of science to this, but it says people who identify as crunchy typically prioritize organic and locally sourced foods, eco-friendly products, alternative medicine, and minimalism. And being crunchy often implies a desire to live in harmony with nature, make choices that have a lower impact on the environment, and opt for more traditional or natural methods when it comes to personal health and well-being. And I think anybody who practices holistic medicine would say that they, in some way do agree with that. Definitely am doing a natural method for most things in my life these days, especially when it comes to my health and well-being of my family. We take a very holistic and full body approach to that. But when it comes to living in harmony with the environment, that's something where I definitely do, but I'm not extreme in that sense. I still love the luxuries of technology, of cars, of wearing shoes, of having access to clothing that isn't just cotton fiber. And, when you start diving into all these realms, you can get into a rabbit hole very, very quickly. And then you think you have to make a complete switch. And another thing that I just thought of, I have my Stanley water bottle right here. I'm still drinking out of it. I know they've talked about that it contains lead, or that the people at Stanley know it contains lead and they continue to use this product in their water bottles, whatever. You can go so deep into it. And so for me, there's just financially things that I can't make swaps for. And I think that's totally okay. So what I'm about to share, my top 12 crunchy tendencies. This doesn't mean, again, you have to do this overnight, but just things that I've incorporated into my lifestyle and how and why I've noticed it's changed my life. Okay. So starting with number 1 is I save any glass bottle that I can get my hands on. And that is so true. I have a really hard time throwing away glass. And I also think with the canning that I do, or if I do any pickled onions during the week, or if I'm putting leftovers away, I'm going to use a glass container, so I might as well keep the glass pasta jar or the glass curry paste that we have. There's these cute little jars, and then I filled up that jar and took it with me to work so I could have that in my coffee on the weekends, and things like that, where I just have a hard time throwing glass away. Okay. Number 2 is I take 1 hour out of my week to pick up raw milk. Yeah, this is kind of ridiculous. I'll say that. Unfortunately, I know the most, where I go is very clean, and the gal is wonderful. And I know it's a 30-minute drive there and back. It's something I'm willing to do because then we have milk for the week. And to be able to use dairy products again, as somebody who has been lactose intolerant, has just been so fun. I feel like I've really been able to expand my diet because I'm not worried about how it's going to make me feel, because I know that the raw milk is going to make me feel fine. I don't have any negative side effects with it. My skin doesn't break out, which was a huge issue with me and dairy, and with me in an almond milk. So having raw milk be something that actually makes me feel good. I feel full. I feel satisfied when I drink my coffee in the morning. It has just been incredible, and it's something that I'm going to continue to stick with. I know raw milk in itself is a controversial topic. I did a podcast on it a few weeks ago. I just don't get why people get so up in arms about things like this. I mean, if our biggest concern is that somebody you know is drinking raw milk and you want to get very ticked off about that, like I would really then question like why that's so triggering to you. You know, I'm very much like what you're doing doesn't affect me. It doesn't mean I don't care about you and want what's best for you. But if you're doing something that I don't agree with, I'm not going to tell you that it's completely wrong. There's a lot of instances that I see with, you know, people around me where they'll take a medication and it has a negative effect. And I want to tell them like, the reason it's having a negative effect is because your body's not responding well to it and your gut health is being compromised. And, you know, like I could preach at people about things that they're doing, but that's not me. Nobody likes that. Nobody wants to hear that. That's when we get very defensive because it's like, we have to do what works for us, and that doesn't mean that I should have any input on what you're doing. So then I just think it's interesting when people get very upset about things like that. So anyway, that is something I will continue to do. I'm trying to get my husband on board. He's like, okay, you can make my coffee with raw milk, but I'm still going to use the store-bought stuff for my Cheerios. I'm like, that's fine. Like it doesn't have to be overnight. And that's the same thing with him. Like it's gradual changes. I think it's just so funny because every week, like and this is an exaggeration, but I'll be like, every week I'll tell him like, hey, I want to start doing this. And he's like, oh my gosh, what is it now? You know, and like he's such a good sport about it, but I just know like it is like pretty frequently where I'm like, okay, I just learned this. Like, I think we should make an adjustment here. And it's like, yeah, it is pretty frequent, but I think that growing in that capacity has been very exciting for me. And because it so closely relates to what I do as an occupation, it's just fun. It doesn't feel overwhelming because I'm always trying to learn and grow so I can help the people around me to the best of my ability, right? And the best of my knowledge. So I do the raw milk. I love it, but driving an hour to get it, I know is a little silly. Okay, number 3 is I start my garden from seed in my basement. And this would be a little bit different if we had a nice basement. Our basement, I mean, we're in a house that's over 100 years old, so it's nothing special, it's nothing fancy, but I have my potting soil down there and my peat moss, and all of my little seedlings are growing. They're growing so fast, it's just so fun. I think that is just where I geek out and I nerd out, and it's just, I don't know. It's such a fun hobby, and going down there, taking care of them every day, like I just really love that. I'm trying to grow a lot in bulk, and I know we've talked about this, but it's fun then because I tell people what I'm doing and they're like, oh, well, I'll take this many pepper plants or this many tomato plants. And it's just fun to have such a connection with what you're creating and what you're growing because I've seen the whole process. And to me, that's just been really enjoyable. Number 4, I use an oil-based facial cleanser and makeup remover, and then I use frankincense tallow as my moisturizer. I'm a big tallow gal. Frankincense tallow is something I make from scratch on my own, and I really love it. I feel like my skin has never looked better than it does now, and I really would say that using minimal, real ingredients that I can pronounce, that I can identify, has been a huge game changer. I know they talk a lot about like hyaluronic acid and SPF, and there's so many different moisturizers and cleansers and getting on like retinol and all of these things and these chemicals that, yes, like I'm not arguing that they're not maybe good for your skin, but for me, I just needed to simplify it. I needed something cheap, I needed something effective, and those two combos have worked so well for me. I use the brand Kalos, Kalos. And then I'll also use Primally Pure. I have some of their products left over, but then of course I'll make some on my own. And making my own has been also really fun because again, you're just like connecting with what you're putting on your skin, what you are putting into your bloodstream. Like I think that having that connection to what I'm doing maybe makes it crunchy because I have that deeper understanding of why I'm doing something. I'm not just doing it because I saw somebody else on social media doing it. And if people have questions, like I want them to directly ask me why I'm doing things because or like rather than just doing it to do it. Because for me, I feel like for so long I did things just because the people around me were, and now I'm taking an individualized approach and doing things because it feels right for me, because I can tell like my body needs something different than the next person that's posting about whatever it is online. So taking that approach to what I need and what my body needs maybe is then kind of on that crunchy tendency, but I really like both of those products. Number 5 is I avoid seed oils and corn syrup as much as possible. Seed oils is such a buzzword, and people are saying it so much now that it's like losing its effectiveness. I follow a few people online and they're always going on rants about seed oils, and I get it, but like we can't just look at a quote bad product and say, well, it's bad because it has seed oils. Like, well, tell me why it's bad because it has seed oils. Like, do you know the depths of why you shouldn't consume seed oils, or are you just saying that because it's a buzzword? You know, like some of that, I feel like when we start saying all of these terms, it's like, yeah, we get it. We're not supposed to have this, whatever. Like, but how do you avoid it? Having that deeper understanding, again, of why you want to avoid certain seed oils, right? And not just make that blanket statement. And then like with corn syrup, like, well, why do you need to avoid corn syrup? Like, what is the reason? Having that understanding. And that's the thing with clients too, is I really try to go into why I'm telling you something. So much of what I do is education based. Like they have a podcast, they have a reflection workbook based off what we're talking about that week. Because you need to learn what is actually going on in your body, how your body is responding to certain products, and why you should or shouldn't be consuming them. And with clients, that's a very gradual approach. It's not like, okay, you started working with me day 1, throw out anything with canola, soybean, or vegetable oil, right? No, like we're not doing that because that's crazy. That would be crazy and it wouldn't be long-term sustainable. But for me, I've been doing this long enough that I know like I'm not going to buy a product if I see those things. That doesn't mean I go out to a restaurant and I'm super nitpicky about my food or about like what somebody else makes for me. I'm very grateful if somebody makes me a meal. I just know that different than my clients where we talk about removing and replacing and understanding that you can't have a 100% perfect diet all the time. I am a pretty big stickler on those two. Having the seed oils and having the corn syrup. And really, I mean, I could dive into the depths of all of this, but I would encourage you to go back and listen to me talking about the Core 4 method. I did a 4-part series on that. Go ahead and listen to that. And then if you still have questions on like, well, why or why should or shouldn't I be consuming these things, then you can always message me as well. But I don't want to get into that on today's episode, but those are 2 things that I'm pretty, stern on, I would say, with the things that I personally consume. Number 6 is I put my phone on airplane mode when I'm sleeping. Of course, this has to do with the EMFs and the radiation coming from your phone. When it's, you think about it like pinging off of different cell phone towers and your Wi-Fi. I turn mine on airplane mode just so I know my phone's kind of dormant while I'm sleeping. And then I do actually charge my phone typically outside of our bedroom. I know there's a few different reasons. Sunlight before blue light is a big reason that I talk about this, of like having your eyes see the sun before they see your cell phone. And so a good way for me to implement that is just to charge my phone outside of our room. And I do that most nights. I really noticed that when I didn't do this and when my phone is beside me, when I'm shutting off my alarm, that light like instantly gives me a headache. Like I'm very sensitive to that in the morning because I know that's not the first thing I want to see. And so if I'm able to create that separation, I just notice I feel a lot better. I'm able to actually get a lot more done in the morning. I love my morning routine and I love taking my time throughout my morning routine. So if looking at my phone can be the last thing that I do before I sit down and work, I think my days honestly start out the best. Number 7 is I wear green and blue light glasses when I'm on a screen or if it's dark outside. So, For example, if I'm reading my Kindle in bed before I go to bed, I have those glasses on. If we're watching TV or in the morning, like if we go and work out at the gym, then I'll put those on because I know on the way there, I'm going to want to be planning out my workout on my phone, which again, it's dark outside, so I'm not seeing sunlight before blue light. So I use that kind of separation to make sure that's not the first thing that my eyes see, even though I can't prevent like the fluorescent lights when we go to the gym and all those things that kind of probably disrupt my body's like stress response and cortisol levels. I do what I can, right? And that's all you can do. You can only do what you can do. And when we get so obsessive over every little thing, we start to feel like kind of debilitating. Like it feels debilitating. Like, well, I can't do anything because I can't be perfect. And that's just what I've had to learn of like, you can't be perfect. Every day won't be perfect, but how you then respond the next day tells a lot about the habits that you formed. Okay, so number 8 is I make my own bread products and use as much as I can with sourdough starter. I honestly don't even know how to use yeast. I have a bread machine and I did do that for a little bit. I haven't bought yeast in a long time, but what I love about sourdough is that it's fermented. You're using a fermented starter, and every product that I make, I don't feel bloated, I don't feel puffy, I don't feel uncomfortable after consuming bread. And I've talked many times how it's healed that relationship with bread and pastas because I make so much of that from scratch. And when I make something from scratch, I just feel really good and really proud about the product. And I also am just so used to how it makes me feel and the difference that I know like a store-bought bread or store-bought croutons or pasta or like pizza crust would make me feel not super great. So making that swap has been really fun. I've noticed a lot of people obviously getting into sourdough. Again, it's kind of one of those like buzz things. And I think that's really cool. I mean, the fact that people are wanting to even make a switch with the bread they're consuming or the bread products, that's a great like first step in really diving into making more foods from scratch. And that is what initially led me into making a lot of things from scratch. It led me into wanting to start gardening, which is, again, I've talked about just because I'm so passionate about knowing what I'm consuming, why I'm consuming it, and the effect that it's having on my body. Okay, number 9. This one could be a little controversial, but 1.5 years ago, I threw out all the medications and pills in our household, and we only have topical ointment, but I opt for honey when I'm able, like a raw honey. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But this is something I know we are very fortunate to have the ability to do this and not notice debilitating effects or negative effects by not taking a medication. And this is all in no way shaming you if you take a medication or if you need medication. That is not what I'm saying. I knew that for Nate and I, we didn't need it. And that it was there in, like the ibuprofen or the Tylenol or allergy medication. I'm like, or even like reflux medication my husband had too. Like with how we eat and how we nourish our body with using herbs and using spices and supplements when we need to, like we didn't need that. And I also didn't want to depend on ibuprofen to fix my headache. Quote fix, like it's not really fixing, but like dulling the pain of the headache. I wanted to find the root cause of why I even had a headache in the first place. For me, so much of it had to do with screen time, being on screens, or being very, very stressed and not managing it properly. So I knew, okay, if I wanted to keep up with those negative habits and then just take ibuprofen, I wasn't getting to the root cause. And so really when I just threw them all out, I didn't throw them all out. I handled that process very properly. I know you don't just like throw them in the trash can. But when I got rid of them in our household, I really just did that because I wanted us to take any option possible before we relied on that. And again, that's not to shame anybody who goes to the quick fix, because sometimes I get it. You've got period cramps, like you just want the pain to go away rather than finding the root cause. And I 100% understand that. But for us, we are very, I would say, generally healthy. And I noticed that we barely reached for these things. And when we do, it was because we weren't being proactive. And so I'm trying to focus on being more proactive. And I can tell you in a 1.5 years, we have not once gone to like our first aid kit and been like, oh, I really wish I had this medication that we got rid of, because we just don't need it. And we knew that we were maybe reaching for it when we didn't need it, just out of habit. And I remember even in high school, like before a basketball game, I knew I would feel sore afterwards. So I would take 2 ibuprofen at halftime just for the heck of it, even though I didn't physically need it right away. And so it's like those things that become habit really quickly that we just wanted to kind of avoid. And I think with reflux too, I had mentioned that medication, like when you're eating a good diet and you're doing things that you need to do to prevent, like, if you think of like fried and greasy foods and a lot of like fast food, like, yeah, we might still notice like we have some of those symptoms, but it's because we're eating in a way that's completely different than how we eat at home. And we know that. So we put up with those negative symptoms because we know we don't need a pill to help minimize these symptoms, because we know it's going to go away as long as we drink enough water, we do water with lemon and salt, or we go for a walk after we eat, or we go to bed. Like that, those symptoms aren't going to last forever. So it's just kind of like enduring them as much as we can. Not to say that medication isn't a great option. But for us, we've noticed we just don't really need it if it's not accessible. With this, like I mentioned, the use of honey, we do still have topical ointments. So like I went to Panera Bread. This is probably 6 months ago. And I always say 6 to 8 hours after you eat something is when you're typically going to notice your body responds negatively. And it was exactly 8 hours afterwards. My ankles, I woke up, they had all of these like rashes up to my knees, and I was so itchy, I just could not stand it. So I was doing the math. I'm like, okay, so what would I have eaten today that was different than any other day? Well, I got a blueberry bagel from Panera Bread. And so I tried to use a topical ointment, and yeah, it did okay. Honestly, for me, like showering with warm water and using a charcoal bar, we have like a charcoal bar of soap in our bathroom, using that on like that area of my body helped a lot. And then I put on moisturizer, but it was so uncomfortable. And so I knew like, okay, yes, at this point I'm using that topical ointment because it's absolutely driving me crazy. Whereas like I feel like the charcoal and the hot water helped just as much. And the moisturizing that rash, it's just such like fluke things like that I still am like, okay, topical ointments, whatever. But where I use honey is if I have like a cut or a burn, I'll use raw honey to put on there. And it helps so much, even more than like a Neosporin. And I was so shocked by that, but I had burnt myself with my hair wand, and I just put honey on it, and that burn just like completely minimized. So honey is one that I will first use if I can. For a rash, I was not going to put honey all over me because I don't know the benefit that would have had, whereas I more so like exfoliated and moisturized. But things like that, we keep that around. In addition to that, I haven't though taken like a medication or an antibiotic in over 3 years, which again, I know I'm very fortunate to say that. That's again, not to shame you if you have, but for me, again, it's always like that deeper understanding of like, what's the root cause of what's going on? Like, where do I feel that there's some congestion? What foods can I take? Then what supplements what foods, what herbs and spices, and then what supplements can I take? And then that next step is always that medication or taking something a little bit stronger, which 100% sometimes you just need. But for me, it was really about taking that gradual approach rather than just getting on something because it's supposed to work. And then I also like with my supplements, I take a beef organ supplement, and then I take a stress response supplement with chamomile and inchenza in it, more of those herb focused supplements. And then if I notice that we're getting sick, so like this morning, I know I'm a little congested. I have been for the last couple of weeks. I use an elderberry syrup, and I'm actually starting to make my own tinctures. So that's probably pretty crunchy too, because tinctures are really, they can look like a syrup. They could look like an herbal blend that you've kind of concentrated. There's a variety of ways you can go about doing that and making those, but for me, it's just something that I want to kind of build my home apothecary, and I've talked about that herbalism class I'm taking. I feel like that had a lot to do with these changes and more so of like the supplement wise, or adding in more herbal remedies or products, just because I'm learning so much about that. I'm learning how to make my own, and again, it's like not just going to the store and getting Dayquil because that's what I've historically always taken, but what could I use instead that's going to be a little less invasive, and it's also doesn't have like red dye 40 or yellow 10 or blue lake 10 or whatever those colors are in those artificial flavors. Like, what can I get that's going to support my body a little bit better, even though it might not cause like instant relief? It's still going to gradually help support your body. Okay. Number 10 is I only use one cleaner for my entire house. This has to do with cleaning my dishes, cleaning my fruit, cleaning my toilets, counters, floors, everything. And that is a Thieves all-purpose cleaner. Thieves is a really good purification essential oil if you're going to diffuse something. So if you notice people in your house are very sick, Thieves is a great one. But I think the blend is really like cinnamon, orange, and clove. Really. And you could do any of those oils to make your own Thieves. I don't sell Young Living. I'm not here to promote anything or any product because I truly don't benefit off of anything I promote. It's all just because I truly like that product. But I know you can buy other all-purpose cleaners. I always think if there's something that's safe enough to be used on my food and on my toilet, like that's what I want in my household. And with Thieves, I know you're able to do that, which is what I love. Okay, number 11 is I propagate my plants in old kombucha jars. So if you come to my house, we have like a ledge in our dining room, and I've got all these kombucha jars, and they've got all these little plants that are being propagated in them. And I was asking Nate, like, okay, what are some things that I do that are just like a little off the wall? And we were just in the dining room, and I just looked around. I'm like, that is something that's pretty niche, probably. You know, you've got an old kombucha jar, that's what you're propagating your plants in. And I honestly, I haven't historically done a lot of that, but I have a lot of plants in our house. It's really how I'm kind of decorating. Plants are so great for, again, purifying the air and producing oxygen. They're just a great addition, and they're also cute. They are very easy to take care of. I mean, anything I own is very easy to take care of. And I just like having them in my space. They're green, they're full of life, they're vibrant. Like that to me has been really great in the winter months, especially as everything outside is brown and dead, to have plants inside. And so I am propagating a lot of plants right now in my dining room using kombucha jars. Okay, and then number 12 is we have a Berkey water filter, and we made that switch when we moved to our farm. If you don't know what Berkey is, it doesn't really matter so much that of the brand. I know Berkey actually doesn't even make water filters anymore. Their business has closed, but there's other brands. Brita, I just learned, is not a sufficient water filter. It's kind of one of those things that they want you to think is working, but it's not actually doing anything. You'd almost be better off just drinking your tap water than actually using a Brita. And so we made that switch when we moved out to our house here. So we have a Berkey. It's like this cylinder. It's like 2 levels, and the top part has filters. It filters our water. What it does is it takes out any viruses or harmful bacteria, parasites, and any chemical contaminants and impurities. So living in a rural area where I know farmers around us use herbicides and pesticides, I'm not anti that. I know there's a time and place for that, especially when you're growing things at such a large scale. But I just wanted to make sure our water was super clean, and using that has been a way for me to know that it is clean and that it doesn't contain any of those things. And now I'm actually on the Berkey website, and maybe they didn't close their business. I really feel like they had. But anyway, if you go on their website, you'll see what I'm talking about. But just having a water filter that really cleans your water has been kind of a game changer. The water tastes so much better because, I don't know, faucet water is just kind of gross, especially in the city. But in addition to this, I do put salt in my water because even with the Berkey, there are vital minerals that are being extracted from our water. And a lot of that is just because they have to sanitize it, right? If you live in a big city, like there's only so much water in most locations that they have to like completely sanitize the water so it's not contaminated with things that are super harmful and would create like mass issues with a bacteria or virus or a parasite. So when they purify that water, they're taking out those minerals. So I want to put all of those minerals back into my water. So using like a quality sea salt or Himalayan salt even would be okay. I really like the Celtic sea salt or the Redmond's red salt. So, all right, that's the extent of my list. Some things that I do that I believe that aren't crunchy, I thought I should kind of put those out there too, because yes, like maybe this is a little extreme. Maybe this sounds a little extreme, but there are some things that I'm like, no, like I don't think that's possible mass scale. The first one would be organic food and organic products. If we had the ability to mass produce organic food, then yeah, sure, like it's great. But I know, and with my dad being a farmer as well, he does more like corn for livestock. And so like he grows corn for livestock feed or whatever they make out of it. Same with like soybeans. To do that all organic, like there would not be enough food to feed the world if everything was organic. And that's something I very firmly believe, because if you think about not using anything on your produce, and I know they've got different systems in place, even organic will have some sort of chemical on it typically, but it might be one that is like certified organic chemical that they can use then to help with like pest control. But in most cases they are still using something. So that's where I tell clients, I'm like, just clean your stuff well. Use like a vinegar and water combo or ratio when you're cleaning your fruits and veggies, and scrub them well, right? If you are really, really concerned. But organic food, I just know, like, yes, I think there's a reason for pests, there's a reason for insects and all of those things, but we wouldn't have the availability of food that we do if we didn't have non-organic farms and non-organic farmers. The other thing is when we think about like buying your meat, I know that there can be so much confusion around that of like, well, how do I buy like the correct meat? There's grass-fed, there's vegetarian diets, there's pasture-raised, there's yada yada. For me, I buy a local beef. So I will buy, like this last year, we got a quarter of a cow, and that's what we fill our freezer with. If I went to the grocery store and bought beef, honestly, none of that sounds very quality to me. I also think like conventionally raised beef, it just tastes better. If you get into like the crunchy environmental side of things, they're going to say, well, there's GMOs and there's soy and corn in their feed. And it's like, well, yeah, like that's what plumps them up, right? You're able to use more of the animal because they're a larger size, rather than like if you had a solely grass-fed beef, it's probably not saying it's going to be more fatty, but it's probably not producing as much meat as a conventionally raised animal would. And so things like that, which I really want to have somebody on to talk about that. I need to deep dive into that realm because I want somebody to come talk about that, because I think, we hear organic and we think healthy, and again, that aligns with being crunchy, but there's so much of that I think I have mixed opinions on just based off of where I'm living. Living in rural Nebraska, like you see so much of what is raised around you. You see a lot of livestock, even like with our chickens, like we feed them a grain-based diet, and the whole GMO conversation is just in a realm of its own. And I'm not going to get into that because I think it's kind of bogus, but there's varying opinions on that. But there are some things that just based off of where I've grown up, I see the love and care that people take for their animals out here, especially like even livestock. You look at, we have a place near our house that I drive past almost every single day. Like those cows are living outside. We think conventionally they're raised in sheds and buildings and given food and a foot of space to move around. And I just don't think that's the reality if you're getting a quality source of meat. And so that's why I buy local, even if it's conventional. There's just some different things like that. Like organic doesn't always mean best. Even like with the Western medicine conversation, like some vaccines are necessary, right? It depends on how much you want to deep dive into all of that. And again, I don't share a lot of those very, probably more political opinions on the podcast, and I never will. It's not something I want to talk about and even open up, because I don't think that it's so black and white and we can make it that way. But anyway, all of this to say, I hope this was a way for you to kind of gauge like, okay, do I do that? Is that something I want to add in? Am I crunchy? Which again, I wouldn't say I'm the crunchiest of crunch. And I just think it's kind of a funny and weird term, but I thought this episode would be fun just to kind of see where I'm at and the things that I do that have become very normal for me, but are probably like totally bizarre for other people. And hopefully just start a conversation about it too. You know, if I talked about anything and you're like, wait a second, I need to learn more about that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and we can talk about it, because if you want more details as to why I do something, of course, I would love to share that. So much of my journey has been just learning from multiple sources, not just learning from one specific source, because I don't think you get the bigger picture if you look at that. And so, yeah, this has been a fun episode, and a lot of the things I talked about, I just am looking at now my list. I'm like, that feels so like, maybe that's not bizarre. But if you're listening and you're like, yeah, I've never heard of that before, don't feel bad. Again, this is my job to know these things and to implement these things, because I've noticed such an extreme change in my health because I have. And that's not to say everything that I do is the prescription in a sense that I would write for you, but hopefully it just gave you a different perspective or gave you some different ideas as to how it might be able to help your own health. So let's go ahead and close today's episode in prayer. So dear Lord, just thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity to talk and connect with people through this podcast. I just ask that it's used as a space for people to always feel encouraged and not feel overwhelmed. I ask that as I was talking today, that maybe something stood out to them that they want to explore deeper, or that they want to implement into their lifestyle, or that they want to learn more about, and that they are just given the sense of curiosity around why they're doing what they're doing. They start to maybe evaluate their lifestyle, evaluate their habits, and really find the root cause of what's going on, if there's any issues. I also just ask that if they have any major health concerns or minor health concerns, that they are able to get answers and find answers for what's going on in their body. With that they just feel not overwhelmed by it, that they're able to take it day by day, very gradually make these changes that can be very life transforming, but that it doesn't feel like a daunting task, and that they're able to gradually and naturally find answers, that signs that things just maybe aren't going right or are conflicting in their body, that they're able to tell and they're able to identify, and that it becomes just very obvious to them what's going on. I also just pray for their safety, that wherever they are today, that they get there safely, or that they feel comforted by you in different environments, and that whatever it is on their heart today that is causing them stress and worry, that they're able to work through that and feel at peace because they've connected with you today, and that they've just had that conversation and given you whatever it is that is bothering them or worrying them. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. All right, so thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to follow along with my life outside of the podcast, you can find me at Nourish with Bailey on Instagram. It's Bailey Seaton on Facebook. I'm also on YouTube and TikTok, kinda-ish. Anyway, you can connect with me on any of those platforms. I would love to talk to you and talk more about some of the things I talked about on today's episode. If you want to send me an email to get connected that way, you'll find that in the description of today's episode. But with that, I'll talk to you again next Wednesday. Bye.